What's going on, everyone? It is the Derf. Part 2 on builds surrounding Stronghold for your Titan is here. This build, like the previous one, is going to be no different. Extreme survivability, the ability to do really important burst damage and supporting your allies in endgame activities, hopefully reaching you guys to finish lines that you previously thought impossible. So if you are a Titan lover or you've been looking to spec into Titan and are wondering what is one of the strongest Titan builds you could possibly have, this is the build for you. It is yet another way you can spec into Stronghold and take advantage of the seasonal artifacts. So if you do find anything helpful in this video, please consider liking and subscribing or sharing with a guardian in need. Let's go. For this Stronghold build is going to focus on the Striker subclass for Titan. The super of choice is really up to you. I prefer Fists of Havoc simply because of the recharge rate, comes back to a lot quicker, but in certain situations Thunder Crash is going to absolutely decimate the enemies better. So whichever one you go with is completely up to you. I've done build testing in both of them. In fact, I think my videos I'm going to end up using for the demonstrations are going to be with Fists of Havoc, but trust me, I did try it out on Thunder Crash. It works just as well. It just really depends on the situation what you want to use. For abilities, we're going to go with Rally Barricade, Strafe Lift, Seismic Strike, and Flashbang Grenade. The reason we're using Seismic Strike is the ability to blind targets in your area when you use it, and unstoppable champions get stunned by this as well. The same goes for the Flashbang Grenade. An explosive grenade that damages and blinds nearby targets. It does deal area damage, but more importantly, it blinds enemies, and blinded enemies do not respond the same way as enemies that are just coming at you normal. They're going to be slowed, and that's going to allow you time to take them out. For our aspects, number 1 on the list is going to be Touch of Thunder. Your Flashbang, Pulse Lightning, and Storm Grenades have enhanced functionality. We are only concerned with the Flashbang Grenade, which emits an additional blinding flash on bounce. Now, if you've seen previous videos, you know that I'm a big fan of the Flashbang Grenade pretty much on every build that I can equip it on. And the secondary blast is going to help us, especially in situations where the enemies might be slightly beefier. Next up is going to be Storm's Keep. Cast your class ability to grant a moderate amount of bolt charge stacks to you and nearby allies. While behind your barricade, you and allies gain stacks of bolt charge over time, and your weapons can discharge max stacks of bolt charge. So 2 things are going on here. First, you're going to be getting the bolt charge, which of course, once you rank up to the max stacks possible, lightning strikes are going to be emitted from either abilities and or weapons, just based on this aspect language itself. And then while you're behind the barricade, not only is your barricade going to be absorbing enemy fire and protecting you guys, but you're going to be getting bolt charge on top of it, thereby allowing your weapons, like I said, to discharge lightning strikes after a short amount of time. For fragments, first up on the list is going to be Spark of Frequency. Melee hits increase your equipped weapon's reload speed and stability for a short duration, while amplified, the effects are increased and you gain increased stacks of bolt charge from all sources. So it's important to note here, because we're going to be centered around guarding with a sword, any sword damage that you generate while you have max stacks of bolt charge is going to discharge the bolt charge as well. So it doesn't matter that you're going to be guarding, it's damage that you give to enemies while you have the max stacks of bolt charge. That could also be from proccing the unraveling rounds. It really doesn't matter. Once you get those max stacks, virtually any weapon or ability can discharge the bolt charge for you. Spark of Brilliance is next. Defeating a blinded target with precision damage creates a blinding explosion. A +10 to intellect, but here we want to be able to stun as many enemies as possible, and of course this takes care of our unstoppable champion once again. Spark of Ions is next on the list. Defeating a jolted target or defeating a target with bolt charge creates an ionic trace. You want your ionic traces so that you can get ability energy periodically throughout your traversal of whatever activity you might find yourself in. Last but not least is going to be Spark of Amplitude. Rapidly defeating targets while you're amplified creates an orb of power. Now, this one is going to be up for some debate. You could easily substitute this one for Spark of Resistance. I personally want the extra Orb of Power because an extra Orb of Power means I can get my barricade back faster, which again, I understand is only 38 seconds normal cooldown. However, it gives you that barricade back just a little bit quicker. So you're thinking maybe anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds. That's a pretty big difference. That means potentially you get a second barricade back before your first barricade is even finished, which means you can just sit behind there carefully guarding with your sword, reflecting damage, and of course, just helping your team. For stat distribution, I'm going to recommend you focus on resilience first and foremost, and then split it up evenly between discipline and strength. You want your other 3 abilities to be at minimum a T3. Recovery is probably most important to try to get above a T4 just so you have a little bit of extra back on your recovery. And your intellect, I recommend having this at least a 5 if you can help it. If you can't have it higher than a 3 because you run out of mods or whatever, that's totally fine. The reason I recommend having it at a 5 is your Thunder Crash cooldown, if that's the super you choose, is going to be 9 minutes and 16 seconds. Now, that's not to say you're not going to be picking up Orbs of Power and generating tons of damage and tick damage and things to minimize that cooldown. But it's going to be a little bit different on Fists of Havoc, which is a roaming super, which you do get bonus regen rate on your super, when it comes to this because it is roaming. So keep that in mind. If you want to switch between the 2 supers and not feel like you're going to be missing out on recharge rate, I recommend having Intellect at about a 5. It's just a little bit quicker. So you're sitting around the 8-ish, 8:20-ish minute mark, give or take. It's a little bit more tolerable, especially in a slower moving activity, like maybe a master sector. You're not going to be generating a ton of damage in, a very high frequency. So you don't have to wait nearly as long. You can still theoretically, even if you're speed running that master sector, you should still be able to get at least 2 Thunder Crashes during that short amount of time, which is going to be extremely helpful for you. For weapons, I have almost the exact same setup as before, but we're going to talk about it and just kind of explain why you see what you see on the screen right now. I do think that you have a lot of different options, and we're going to go through them after I go through why I have it set up the way I have it now. First up on the list is the Call. Never a bad option. I have this for the barrier piercing capabilities. Next up, I have Le Monarch, not only for the Unrelenting Catalyst perk that gives you your health back on rapid final blows, but the fact that it has snapshot sights and it spreads poison and it intrinsically stuns overloads. Let's not forget that because of one of our aspects in our class, this can also bolt charge from a very, very safe distance. So you don't necessarily have to always be up in the face of enemies. Le Monarch lets you pick enemies off from a far distance safely, especially if you're running solo through a GM, or you're running solo through like an advanced Nightfall or something that's a little bit more difficult to handle by yourself without a fire team. Abysmal Edge. If you saw my last video, you already know the main reason why I have Abysmal Edge, and that is going to be because, number one, it's a wave frame, which is super cool for swords. There's really not many out there. The flash counter, though, is the perk that you want regardless of swords. Now, you can look at Light GG and find out what weapons do come with the flash counter. I will tell you, though, Light GG is wrong. It does tell you on there that Bequest can roll with this, which I was kind of thinking like, hey, for an art class, maybe I can shape that and put flash counter on and maybe have a little bit more fun with it. Bequest does actually not come with flash counters. So just keep that in mind. There's a number of other swords that you can get randomized rolls on, but with the seasonal activity, you should be able to focus your tome to get the flash counter roll that you want. I recommend pairing this with Surrounded, which will in turn boost your damage when 3 or more enemies are in close proximity. So with Enhanced Flash Counter, of course, blocking damage after raising your guard amidst a short-range blast that disorients targets, but the enhanced version gives you additional ammo reserves, a little bit more range. Again, we're not talking like, a football field worth of range, but enough that it is a little bit more noticeable. And of course, the damage that you emit from this is going to be more noticeable as well. I was doing about 2,000, somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 on a Nightfall boss when I was doing some rough damage numbers, and I was trying to figure out like, okay, well, how much am I really getting from this, with this class? That's not even counting the fact that this can discharge your bolt charge. So one of the cool things about the Arc class, when you're standing behind your barricade and you're guarding with this, you can reflect damage, gain stacks of bolt charge, and then discharge those lightning strikes. Even if the enemy is right in front of you, you're going to be getting those additional stacks just from the barricade itself. And you can do additional tick damage to a boss or a major or a champion, which is pretty cool. You want the balance guard and the hungry edge if you can help it, but virtually the flash counter is your first and foremost focus. And then I recommend putting on a backup mag. So before I get into armor, I'm going to go through the different options of weapons that you can pair with this sword, depending on the activity that you want. And I'm just going to make it quick because I know you're thinking that I'm going to spend 18 minutes talking about 18 different weapons. That's not the case. So here we go. If your main goal is to stun barriers, your main weapon is probably going to be something along the lines of the Call, Name's Lance, Supremacy, Mikkel's Reverence, or TINASHA's Mastery. In my last video, I did showcase a clip where TINASHA's Mastery was not proccing the anti-barrier or the chill clip. So as you see there, it was not doing it. And as far as I know, it hasn't been corrected. Hopefully it'll be corrected on Tuesday, but that remains to be seen. So those are your anti-barriers. If your focus is going to be running against unstoppables and you want your unstoppable weapon to be in the kinetic slot, I highly recommend Malfeasance for its amazing damage, Riptide, Resounding, or Scatter Signal. Virtually any of those options will be great options for you if you want to be able to stun unstoppable champs with the weapon specifically. Again, one of the things that I want to point out is you will be able to stun unstoppable champs very easily with the blinding explosions you're going to be generating from your flashbang as well as your melee. So it is not imperative that if you're going into an activity that you are going to be running up against unstoppables, that you even have an unstoppable capable weapon in general and feel like you're going to be lesser than. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, if you want to have an overload slotted in here, there are a few options you can pick, and they all revolve around the same thing, which is what I'm only going to show you one of, and that is going to be a trace rifle. As you can see, my incisor hasn't gotten any exercise in quite some time as it's down to 1900. But one of the things that I haven't even messed around with yet, but you can if you want, if you've got a better roll than I do, I've got dynamic sway reduction and target lock. If you got a better roll, like let's say yours has hatchling or something like that, there's a number of rolls that are very good with the incisor. If you've got one of those rolls where you can generate an amazing amount of tick damage, you theoretically could run your trace rifle in this slot and still have overload stunning capabilities. Now, it's not going to be as cool as, say, other meta trace rifles, if I can even use those three words together, meta, trace, and rifles. But that's where the game is going for this season. So if you do want to switch into an overload stunning capable weapon that you don't want to use your exotic on, you can absolutely put on Incisor or any of the other trace rifles that you can find up in your kinetic slot. A Pentance, which is of course stasis. I guess theoretically you could use the exotics if you wanted to, but Incisor would at least keep your exotic spot open so that you can use more options in the energy slot. Speaking of energy slot substitutions, if you want to be stunning overload champions, that's your number one thing. The top four options are going to be some of the best options you can pick. Of course, the Monarch, Lodestar with its arc alignment jolting ability, Cold Heart, which is going to generate a ton of ionic traces and also increase your damage the longer it remains on target. So I guess if you're going up against a stationary boss or a less swirly boss than others, you could put on Cold Heart in place of your the Monarch, and then put something up here that uses primary ammo to kind of mitigate it. Or you can switch it out for Lodestar, which is going to give you the jolting beam as well, basically on call because you're going to be spamming it. And then if you've got a Cronius, I don't know. I mispronounced it in the last video and I'm mispronouncing it in this video. I'm sure someone can correct me in the comments, but eddy current and jolting feedback for this trace rifle make this a powerhouse because not only do you have the ability to stun overloads, you also can inflict jolt on virtually any target out there with just the push of a button. So you can take advantage of arc debuff targets from your artifact. So these 4 will stun overloads with very little effort. If your goal is to I guess if you wanted to run double primary, you could always put on Vantage Point, which does have the jolting feedback, which does stun overloads intrinsically. I would probably shy away from that just because you can get some more damage out of this just by using one of the other options I mentioned. But if all you have is Vantage Point, you can still find yourself in a relevant spot. If your goal is to stun barrier champs, I recommend using Embraced Identity with Rewind and Precision. Trespasser, a very slept-on sidearm. The super burst is simply incredible. Make sure if you put the Trespasser on, you disable rapid firing in your settings menu. So real quick, I'm going to show you what that is. Go into your settings. Again, I'm on PlayStation, so it's a little bit different for me than you. But here we go.
A few moments later.
Full auto firing. Make sure if you put Trespasser on, you switch that to off. Okay, otherwise you're going to miss out on the way that the gun fires, and you're going to be missing out on additional damage from this primer. This thing does hit like a truck, so but you have to use it right. So just be cautious of that. And of course, if you've got a good roll of Lotus Eater will pierce barriers as well, and it will also spread void damage around. So you can clear out a room of enemies with this with basically a couple of hits. You can stun the barrier champ, and if there's enemies around him, you can take them out once the barrier is dead as well. I recommend backup mag, and then destabilizing rounds for sure. I like the beacon rounds perk on my special ammo sidearms, but I know there's a lot of people out there that would put other stuff on, repulsor brace, things like that. Whatever works best for you, honestly. But Lotus Eater is just a way that you can free up your exotic slot so you can run maybe Malfeasance in the primary. And of course, if you want to stun Unstoppables, if you are not confident with your blinding explosions from your class abilities already, you can put on Iterative Loop with Compulsive Reloader and Volshot, or you can use your exotic and put on Delicate Tomb. Delicate Tomb's not going to be a bad option because of the Ionic Trace potential. So realistically, it just kind of depends on, number one, the activity you're going in, ammo economy for the activity that you're going in. Theoretically, you could run double special if you want to. Make sure you mod your armor accordingly. And then, if it's a higher end activity, you're going to have to mod for champs. Some people are more worried about champs than others. I see it both ways. So that's why I give all these options that you can use to kind of make this build your own, because it's all going to be centered around the sword. Speaking of swords, if you want to use your exotic in the sword slot, or the heavy slot, I should say, you can absolutely rock the Lament. The Lament is going to pair beautifully with virtually all of those options that are legendary because it has the ability to pierce barriers. So that will free you up to be able to use an unstoppable weapon and an overload weapon. So theoretically with the Lament, you could have all three champs safeguarded against virtually at all times. Because this is not a caster or a wave frame sword, just keep in mind, when you get up in the face of enemies, you're going to have to be close. You're not going to have any distance to your heavy attacks. You're just going to have to be up in the face with no buffer. So there are, dungeon bosses, raid bosses that benefit from using the Lament. I'm thinking of Crota. I'm thinking of the final boss in Duality. Certainly others like both of those, but those are the two big ones. Of course, Nightmare Hunts, you can get up close and personal to, the bosses in those as well, because you're going to be using the guard. When you're guarding, you're going to be revving the blade. So once you once you have the blade revved, so to speak, it increases your damage and adds shield piercing to all attacks. So virtually, again, this is just, thinking outside the box. You can pierce barriers and shields with this weapon simply by playing it the way that you're trying to play the Abysmal Edge in general. So Lament's not a bad option. I understand Solar is pretty much non-existent this season. Hopefully it comes back next season, but for the time being, you're just going to have to accept the fact that it's a Solar weapon, and you might have to use a couple extra rounds. But the ammo capacity in both of these is pretty decent, well over 50 rounds. This one comes in stock at 70 with the backup mag, so either way, just be a little bit conscious of your ammo and be a little bit conscious of the surges. Abysmal fits a lot more surges than Lament will. It's just the way the season is going. So we got done with weapons. Let's talk about some armor. First up is going to be the helmet. Spec into whatever general mod you need. I recommend a heavy ammo finder and at minimum to have a void siphon. But because we are going to be running arc, you're going to have to accept the fact that you might have to use 9 energy between these 3. To put that in perspective, your grenade cooldown at a 7 is a 1 minute. Your melee cooldown at a 7 is 1 minute. So if you're hovering right around that 1 minute, you're really not going to be missing out on the extra +5. I mean, if I went down to 6 at both of those in this situation, I think I'd be at 1 minute and 10 seconds. That's really not going to affect anything. If you're already at 1 minute, an extra 10 seconds, I guess on paper, that's a lot. It's 1/6 of the entire cooldown. But in the grand scheme of things, you're not even going to notice it, especially in a GM, which is what you're trying to accomplish by having a Stronghold Titan. It's not going to matter. So just try to keep your strength and discipline around 1 minute cooldowns. So for those who missed the first video on the Stronghold Gauntlets, I'm going to briefly summarize what we already talked about. Clenched Fist maximizes guard stats on equipped swords. You take reduced damage while blocking with a sword. Rapidly damaging targets after blocking shots with a sword grants restoration for a duration determined by the number of shots blocked. As you're blocking, you're going to see a buff counter increasing on the left-hand side of your screen. It's up to you when you decide you want to stop blocking, but just know that when you decide you're going to stop blocking, you're going to give yourself restoration. So you're going to get some additional health while you are vulnerable from not blocking. So I think this is just a kind of a nice cherry on top that Bungie gave us with this. And then, of course, having the maximum guard possible on your sword means you're virtually never going to run out of it. And by virtually, I mean you virtually won't run out of it, as we'll see in the demonstrations. For the general mod, put on whatever general mod you need to spec into. And this is going to be a little bit different than the prismatic version that I have, because we're not going to have consecration and knockout and all those things. It is not imperative that you run with 3 of the heavy-handeds. I recommend having at minimum 1 firepower and 1 heavy-handed. In fact, I recommend pretty much only those 2. This one is on here because I did try to see if I could spam my melee more, but it really didn't even matter. So in place of that, I would either put a void loader or a strand loader, depending on what you want to do. Or I guess theoretically you could put on impact induction so that you can get your grenade back quicker and use it in a pinch if you need to on an unstoppable champion. But whichever way you want to rock it, I think is completely fine. You can also put, if you're lacking in strength, you want strength, you can put Font to Vigor in there. If you need a little extra discipline, you can put Font to Focus. But like I said, a T6 and a T7 of strength and discipline, you're really only waiting a minute if you don't do literally anything except hide in a corner. So I don't think you're really going to be wishing that you had abilities if you play it right. For the chest piece, whatever general mod that you want, I recommend speccing into 2 damage resistances, and I recommend putting on a strand reserves. Part of the reason why I have the Call and the Abysmal Edge on my character is because it synergizes with the strand reserves. So I get bonus reserves for my call, I get bonus reserves for my sword. Either way, I win because I'm not hurting for ammo as bad on either one of them. For the leg armor, spec into whatever general mod that you need. I do recommend running recuperation here. Because we're going to be endgame focused with this build, although certainly you can use this in whatever you want, health is going to be at a premium, not to mention your health is going to deteriorate much quicker on enemy hits when you're at endgame activities than in just a standard Vanguard strike, or you're just roaming around whatever planet that you find yourself on a given day. So recuperation will help you replenish health each time you pick up an orb of power. This one is probably never going to leave my Stronghold Titan. Doesn't matter what class I'm running. Innervation is imperative here because I want to be able to spam blinding grenades as much as I possibly can, and Absolution is worth it as well so that I get a bonus tick back on my melee, my grenade, and my class ability. But you can mod this however you want. I will say, for whatever it is worth, because of the goal that Stronghold Titan has, which is to protect your entire team and take the heat off of them, it is probably not worth the energy spent to put on a Void Surge or a Strand Surge for weapons. And the reason I say that is your main goal when you're running endgame activities is survivability. The whole reason you are a Stronghold Titan is to take the heat off of your teammates so that they can get other things done, whether that is mechanics, or they're picking off enemies from a distance, or fighting for their life and hiding in cover because their health is about to expire and they're about to need a revive. Whatever the reason is, your first order of business as a Stronghold Titan is to draw attention. You are the decoy. Now, you can use that to your advantage by unleashing, a storm of pain to a bunch of surrounded enemies with your block damage. But on top of that, you want to be the focal point of the enemy, especially in endgame activity. Every second that you can keep the enemies off your allies is another, second that you guys are going in the right direction, because they're going to be able to do what they need to do easier and you're just chilling. So the fact that if you really think you need a weapon surge mod, then chances are you're probably not using a Stronghold Titan the right way, because you're not really going to be missing out from the damage that you won't be doing. Your job is to support your teammates more so than deal a bunch of DPS. And again, that is my opinion, but that's just where we stand on that. At least me personally. I know I'm not going to blow the doors off on DPS when it comes to Stronghold Titans. Not saying I can't. You still need to be viable with some DPS, but that's not your goal by running this. For the Titan mark, whatever general mod that you need, go ahead and spec into that. The Font of Restoration, I have this on pretty much all my builds because I want my health to regenerate. And it is important to note that while you are blocking with your sword, you will regenerate health. So just keep that in mind. Bomber is what I recommend because I want to be able to spam my blinding grenade more often. And last but not least is going to be Reaper. You can switch things up however you want to if you think that there's maybe a better combo out there for you, but this is going to give you a very balanced return on both your abilities and your health, which again, in endgame, those are going to be critical, especially your health. For the artifact, make sure in your first column you have modded whatever weapons you are running. You can see that I have Unstoppable Fusion and Piercing Sidearms and Anti-Barrier Sniper Rifle. That's because when I was doing my build testing, I was switching between a majority of those weapons that I just talked about. So, in order to be able to progress any further, you're going to need to select 3 in this slot anyways. So just make sure that you are modded so that you can get the stunning capability for whatever champs you're going on as quickly as possible. In the second column, some of this is going to depend on the weapons that you're running, but with the weapons I have in the slots right now, Volatile Marksman and Unraveling Orbs are going to be numero uno. I also want to be able to use Disruptor Spikes since I have the ability to stun overloads. That's going to disrupt enemies. That gets, because you're going to be damaging them with your Le Monarch. And combatants, that are exhausted, it lowers the damage output. And because your Disruptor Spike is active, it's going to lower their damage output even further. Dielectric is a no-brainer. Defeating an arc debuff target grants bolt charge. You're going to be debuffing targets regularly, so make sure you have Dielectric on. Maligned Harvest and Flashover, again, two that are going to work in tandem here because we're running Void on an arc class. Get your Volatile, get your Weakening, and then once you boost it, you'll be given a Void Shield on top of everything else you're going to have. Flashover, you gain maximum stacks of bolt charge, you become amplified. Being amplified in this build is not going to be difficult at all. And last but not least, Horde Shuttle, damaging unraveled targets with a weapon, occasionally spawns a Threadling. And once you boost this, in case you didn't know, Threadlings sever targets that they damage. So if you run this boosted, oh my goodness, you're going to be taking advantage of Disruptor Spike. And quite honestly, this is going to be one nasty build for you. In the final column, Defibrillating Blast and Particle Reconstruction. Particle Reconstruction, again, I know I don't have a fusion rifle in my primary slot, but if I did switch things up and I wanted to have the fusion rifle in that slot, that's where Particle Reconstruction is going to come into place. So without Particle Reconstruction, I would say your best bet would be Void Flux, simply because you're going to be using Le Monarch. But one thing that's important to notice, or note, I should say, before we exit the screen is whatever you decide to run in your energy slot, make sure that this artifact reflects this. So if you're going to be running Arc, let's say you want to run Lodestar, then make sure you've got your Overload Trace Rifle. Make sure you got your Beam Medic. Make sure you've got your Harsh Refraction as well. But don't neglect your Unraveling and your Horde Shuttle because those are going to be important also. You're never going to need Hold the Line with this build, and quite honestly, you're probably not going to need Overclock and Load. It's up to you whether or not you think Dreadful Finisher is going to be worth the 1 of 12 options that you have selected. Me personally, I don't think it will be, but you'll have to decide for yourself. And of course, don't have any Void selected if you're going to be running Arc, which is kind of a no-brainer, but some people forget that your artifact does not change with your loadouts that you save. So when you select that loadout, like, hey, I feel like trying Arc on this main Arc weapon on this Arc class with my, my Strand sword, see how that goes, see if I get more bolt charges, et cetera, whatever. Make sure that you have all 12 of your slots are going towards your power, because that's just going to make you more powerful on the battlefield. So that is the build. Certainly there are going to be opportunities to debate if this is indeed the best we can do with this Titan. Some are going to say yes, some are going to say no, some are going to have better options or worse options. It really doesn't matter. The idea is to kind of help people think of ways to deal with higher end activity. This week's GM Nightfall is no slouch. There are some GM Nightfalls that, people can breeze through with a relatively competent group of 3. And then there are others like this one where it's going to challenge you. Not necessarily because it's insanely difficult, because I don't think that's the case, just because maybe it's a little bit busier than others. This GM plays different than Hypernet Current. Okay, and those two GMs that I just mentioned are going to play different than, let's just say, Birthplace of the Vile, which we got spoiled with for like almost a month straight, it felt like, last season. They're just going to be different. You didn't necessarily need a Stronghold Titan in Birthplace, but you're probably going to need a Stronghold Titan in Mars Battleground. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Make sure that you select whatever weapons you are most comfortable with and be mindful of your champs. Also make sure on your screen that these are selected for whatever activity that you are going into. If you end up going into an activity that's got an overload champ and you don't have any weapons that are going to stud overloads, well, you're going to have a rough time. So just be mindful of this when you shift this build to kind of how you prefer to play, whether that's Le Monarch or any of these other weapons right here, or the Call, or you want to switch out to Malfeasance. However you want to do, the idea of this build is to give you guys a way to not be as afraid of tackling endgame activities as maybe you were in previous seasons, or maybe you've never considered trying to tackle a GM or maybe a Master Nightfall or whatever. All of them are going to have their own challenges, and the fact that they're not match made means if you're going to be going in there by yourself, you better be careful. So anyway, so that is the build with some loose translations, based on whatever you guys feel. If you did find anything helpful in this video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you know a Guardian out there, well, first of all, if you know a Guardian out there who hasn't seen my first Stronghold build, which centers around Prismatic Titan, be sure to have them check that out and then send this video to them. My goal is to help as many people as possible. And if you're a savvy veteran Titan out there, certainly nothing I've gone over today is going to, blow the doors off of your brain. Okay, I understand that. You've heard of Stronghold, you've heard of guarding with the sword, but this new sword that we've got, Abysmal's Edge, is a very good sword. And the fact that it's wave framed means you don't necessarily have to be in the face of enemies the entire time. So that's very nice. But anyways, I appreciate your guys' support. So what I'm going to do now, it's kind of similar to what I did previously. I'm going to roll some more highlights from the build test for this and just kind of go over what you guys see on the screen. Hopefully, again, this helps somebody out there. As always, that is my goal. So, all right, let's roll over to the next highlight. All right, here we go. So in the beginning of this little highlight reel, you're going to be able to see basic ways that most people use their Arc Titan. I'm putting down the barricade. I'm doing tick damage from a relatively safe distance. And what you're not seeing is the support aspect. It's not something that you're going to win a medal for, but it's something that all your allies are going to really appreciate behind the scenes. And that's going to be the added addition of Bolt Charge. You can see Le Monarch is no slouch in this. That was doing 10,000 damage per hit on that break. So, of course, you got Fist of Havoc, which you can roam around in. And then when you come across champs, you put that barricade down. Now, all of a sudden, if you've got allies, you guys are going to be dealing an absurd amount of damage in very little time. Once you get into like the busier parts of the strike or the GM or the raid or wherever you might find yourself where you need a Stronghold Titan like this, that's when it's really going to shine. You're taking the heat off your allies. You're taking the heat basically off of the team in general and putting a neon sign on your back saying, "Come at me, bro." And that's exactly what these enemies are going to be doing, especially in higher end activities. The aggressiveness of these enemies can be pretty daunting for, the average player who's never even considered doing endgame. So you got to be able, with your Stronghold Titan, you got to be able to pick and choose when you are activating your class ability. You got to pick and choose when you're going to expend your ammo. You're going to have to think a little bit more critically, especially when you're in the face of a champ. You've got other adds around you. It's probably not the best time to put your guard down. Keep reflecting the damage to the enemies in front of you. A little extra patience means that you can last longer in battle. Again, you're not trying to speedrun. You're trying to survive. You're also trying to take the heat off your allies. And as you can see here, whether you're going up against the boss or it's extremely busy with adds, you can still work your way around the battlefield while you're blocking. Find out what the best area is for you to just kind of, I don't know what the word is, absorb or be the distraction, absorb the attention of, your opponents. And what you don't see right now is my guy, my ally, my random ally that I had on this run. He's just running around being able to do his thing without a care in the world that this champ is coming after him, without a care in the world that some of these tankier adds that are more central into the battlefield, not necessarily on the edges. You see I'm getting attacked by Savathun right there, or Savathun's buddy right there. It really makes things easier overall on your fire team. So only having one ally in this encounter, I mean, just think about it. In a GM, that's going to be tough. In a Nightfall, it's already tough enough simply because the enemies are intrinsically more aggressive. So as being the Titan that you are in this build, whether it's the Prismatic build or the the arc build that I have here in front of you, I mean, just look at the way I'm able to reflect damage. My ally is still able to use the spear to shoot at Savathun's buddy. My ally is still able to survive because this ogre, for whatever reason, just loves me. And I'm not saying that doesn't make you a hero, okay? That's your job is to distract. Your job is to be the neon sign that says, hey, come at me. So that's what you're going to have to think about virtually in any Nightfall, GM, endgame activity where survivability is key and the enemies are ultra aggressive. So again, if you did find anything helpful in this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Also check the scorecard. You're going to see the orbs of power you generate are going to be no slouch as well. So we'll see you guys next time. Take care.